When you wake up in the morning, your day might begin with your alarm. From there, you might react to the first thought that pops into your mind. Maybe a worry from the day before. Maybe you drift or let yesterday's patterns take over. If that's your habit, you may find yourself becoming someone who reacts rather than someone who acts. Your day doesn't need to begin like that. It can begin with the very first act you choose, one that's aligned with your highest values and most important goals. That's why your first morning act matters more than you think. It's the hinge on which the rest of your day swings. Hey there, it's me, Core, and you're listening to Exercising Self-Control from Fitness to Flourishing. Most of your day is already waiting to exert its influence on you. External forces that are ever present and ever insistent. Other people, other expectations, random demands, the schedule, the noise. You don't get to redesign all of that. But in the morning, you get a rare pocket of freedom. For a few seconds, you are not yet stepping into yesterday's momentum. This is the first thing that's yours to shape. Before the world shoulders its way in, before the old identity gets its bearings and the conditioned self gets triggered. The preferred self isn't a magical version of you that shows up later once conditions improve. It's a standard, your standard, designed with purpose. You, at your best, defined as a set of behaviors you consider excellent according to your own values. If you'd like to explore past episodes about the preferred self and how to define one, check the postscript at the end of this episode transcript. If you don't already have a clear preferred self defined, here are some questions to get an idea of what it might be. Ask yourself, if I were excellent in every respect important to me, how would I describe myself? What does good look like for me when I'm operating with excellence? What would I do during a typical day if I was truly living with excellence? Then choose 3 to 5 behaviors that would make that preferred self undeniable. Examples might be get up at the same time every day, schedule my important tasks, exercise daily, keep a gratitude journal, speak with honesty, do the hard things first, keep promises. You're not building a persona, you're building an identity standard. Now we get to the mechanism. When your first morning act aligns with that preferred self you've defined clearly, you create what you might call a psychologically consistent through line, meaning your day no longer feels like it's made up of unrelated choices. It feels like one continuing story. For example, I'm the kind of person who keeps commitments. I'm the kind of person who speaks honestly. I'm the kind of person who doesn't negotiate with my values before breakfast. That's not a guarantee of a perfect day, but it makes it easier to keep steering in the direction you chose. Because your first act with your full intention moves you in that chosen direction. Do your best not to start your day by asking, what should I do today? Your brain starts looking at the options available. That opens you to the influence of your circumstances. Now you are dependent on the externals, and they are almost certainly not aligned with what you consider excellent. Instead, ask a better question. What is my preferred self doing today? You've established this already, so the options are limited by your standard of personal excellence. You then think and act from that perspective. Because the first act of the morning isn't just a task, it's training, it's self-direction. You're moving from a position of reaction to the world to one of virtuous self-control. You're directing your attention regardless of what the world offers. And that matters because the world doesn't care about your preferences as much as you do. If you don't put effort into making the world you want, it will be influenced by everyone and everything else. That goes for your identity as well. As the poet E. Cummings put it, begin quote, "To be nobody but yourself in a world which is doing its best, night and day, to make you everybody else, means to fight the hardest battle which any human being can fight and never stop fighting." End quote. The preferred self becomes real through practice and repetition. So create a ritual. Call it a contract if you want. A simple, symbolic first act you do every morning. Something that says, without debate, I operate with excellence. Keep this simple. It doesn't really matter what the act is as long as it aligns with your preferred self. Here are some examples. Sit in silence for 1 or 2 minutes, getting in touch with your highest values. Drink a glass of water as a first act of supporting your health. Write 1 sentence in a journal describing your focus for the day. For example, today I am only eating the meals I have planned. Walk outside for 10 minutes. Do a short mobility sequence. Exercise for a few minutes with a simple body weight routine. The point is not performance. It's following through on your commitment to live as your preferred self as your first act of the day. If the act is meant to anchor your identity, then your attitude toward it has to be non-negotiable. You don't, in quotes, feel like it. You do it because the whole point of this practice is to reduce negotiation. Every time you skip this first act of consistency, you send a message to yourself. It says that your preferred self is just a good idea, not a commitment. And then the day gets chaotic. Then your attention gets targeted by others. Then you're back to fighting to stay focused. So treat the first act as a way to set the tone for the day. Every morning, you get to prove who you are. You only need to prove this to yourself. No one else needs to know. It's an act of self-creation, not performance for an audience. If anyone else sees it happening, that's okay. But that's a consequence and not the purpose. This is a private act. Here's a way to think about this. Your day has 2 clocks. 1 clock is external, schedules, obligations, messages, deadlines set by others. The other clock is internal, the identity you set in your first act. If you start with reaction, the external clock, you are running on a schedule not set by you. If you start with alignment, your internal clock, you are running on the schedule you set, even if it includes others. You're acting from a different place, looking at the circumstances differently, more clearly referencing your own values. And that shifts how you interpret everything the world provides. Start tonight by briefly describing your preferred self, if you haven't already done so, and writing 3 to 5 behaviors that are consistent with this person. Then, tomorrow morning, choose 1 first act. Make it something that feels too easy to fail. Something you could get done on your worst day before you negotiate, before you bargain, before you scroll. Then do it. Simple as that. Because discipline doesn't begin when you are motivated. It begins when you decide to act as your preferred self before the world gets a vote. Would you like help defining and living as your preferred self? I've built a place for that. On April 2nd, I'm launching a school community called Exercising Self-Control. Inside, you earn your ACT score by stacking days you don't break. Miss a day, it resets to 0. Start your streak, raise your personal standard of excellence, and train yourself to take action as your preferred self, whatever the circumstances. The link to join the waitlist is in the show notes. That's it for today. Catch you next time.